This is a new panel. We haven't done one of these before. We brought together some people that were involved in the original Viper race program back in the 90s, and I guess a little into the 2000s. And we thought it'd be interesting for those of you who maybe weren't around back then to hear some of the stories about how Viper got into racing and literally dominated the world stage of racing for a period of time. I'm going to turn this over to Sean Romick in just a second, but I have just a couple short things about the panelists. Gene Martindale is one of the panelists, and one time he brought out the new, this was like the 99 ACR, I think it was, to our Northern California region for a club event, and we were shooting a video for our Viper Owners Association national competition, and we called it Smokin'. And one of my friends was selling his blue and white coupe to get the 98 GT2, so it was done, and so he was going to change the tires anyway, so we smoked those tires down the corner, and we enlisted Gene Martindale to be the driver for that. So that was a lot of fun. And my history with Neil Hanneman is that when they first showed the GTSR at Laguna Seca back in 1995, right, we went around Laguna Seca for the parade lap, and it was his project, so he was going to drive it around for the little parade, and the PR person came up to Bob Lutz and said, I was staying with Bob and Denise Lutz, and she goes, okay, it's time to go for the ride, you want to go? And Bob's like, no, I don't need to go, I don't want to steal anything from Neil, let someone else go. And so she looks at Denise and says, you want to go? And she goes, yeah, sure, go where? He goes, for the lap around Laguna Seca in the GTSR. She goes, okay, and I'm like, can I go in your lap? And she looked at me and said, I really think it'd be more appropriate if the president of the Viper Club of America went with him. And the PR woman was like, no, you have to go. And she says, no, I really think he should go. And she's like, no, it should be you. And the three of them go into a huddle, it's Bob and Denise and the PR woman. And after the huddle, she comes up there, it's you. She walks on. So I got to ride around Laguna Seca, probably the only time it had a passenger seat.
And it was that car, right?
It was that car. It was that car.
That car, it had the number 5 on it.
Yeah, it had a 5. Yeah.
5 actually goes back to another, Dick Myers, that was his race car number at the time. So he was one of us that was actually racing, so we put his number on the car. And yes, what also is not known is that we had messed up, something had messed up with the clutch geometry, and it was slipping. And I was not sure I'd even make it. And and it was supposed to just be a slow lap anyway, but it was probably kind of as fast as I could go. But nobody noticed. The car made a lap with the slipping clutch, and we alerted it down.
I never knew anything was wrong. Anyway, so I'll stop talking. I asked Sean Romick here is going to be the moderator. As passionate as I am about Viper, this guy knows way more about Viper racing than I'll ever know. So I thought it was more appropriate that he moderate this because he'll know the right questions to ask of these people. So Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Maurice. Appreciate that. Very honored to be asked to speak about this program. I've been fortunate to get to know these gentlemen a little bit over the years. I started the Viper Racing History website back in 2017. I tried to track down the history of where all these factory race cars went after they were done racing with the factory. And it's kind of expanded a bit to become just a repository for original documents, photos, stories, so this history isn't lost. And I'm continuing to learn even today from these guys about all the things that went on behind the scenes to literally make this car a world champion. Just because I'm curious, how many here have some familiarity with it? The history of the car? And some are new? Yeah, great. When you say left, where did that come from? There are. So if you actually, I made a website, viperracinghistory.com. You can see the history of everyone and where they're currently racing around the world. Now the cars have entered historic racing. So just this weekend at Laguna Seca, where you introduced the car, one of the factory cars is participating out there, chassis 27. So you can still see them. running today. So, a little bit of a program overview. This was built off the 96 GTS platform. The goal is to go sports car racing, endurance sports car racing internationally. There was actually funding coming from Chrysler Europe and to try to get the Chrysler name for some of their other cars being sold overseas. Much like the production team that you heard from this morning, the factory race team was even smaller. I mean, just a handful of people at first that Neil had to select. And it was done in-house. So a lot of fans may think, or come to think, that this car was done in France and developed exclusively there, but actually Chrysler did a lot of the design work here in the US. They did have partners, which we'll talk about, but the goal was to actually use as much of the street car as they could and the street car suppliers as they could. They didn't just want to go to aftermarket racing companies for everything. There was a hope to put this knowledge back into the company through its people. And the factory actually raced primarily through 95 to 2000, but then customers continued racing after that. Orica was a company that Chrysler worked with that continued to do evolutions on the car and support customer sales internationally. There was 5 prototype chassis built, we call them P cars, and then they ended up building 51 of these GTSRs with C chassis. They were sequential, but you can see they skipped number 29, so the last car is C52. The first 13 of those cars were built entirely in the United States at Chrysler facilities, and then from spring of 1998, they actually started assembling cars from parts sent from the US over in France. And as we talked about this morning with Mr. Myers here, that was simply because it was a lot cheaper to ship parts and assemble the cars over there than to ship a whole car with taxes, import duties, and everything that has to be done legally. To send a whole car, you can just send in parts and get around doing all of that. And it's really amazing how much success the factory program had when you consider the car was introduced in 1992, and they won 3 world championships consecutively and won 80% of those races during those championships. And then they came to race in the United States, won even more, and 2 championships there. And they won this car right here, won at Le Mans in the GT2 class in 1998, and they won in 99 and 2000 again before the factory program ended. And I'm sure many of you have seen a car, where's number 91, it's red with white stripes. You might have seen him when we visited Connor yesterday. That car won Daytona 24 Hours overall. It was the first American-based production car to ever do that in the history of that race. Viper did that 8 years after the street car was introduced. You know, it's always interesting to compare and contrast with like Corvette that came out in, 1953? They had decades of a head start. And Viper did that in just 8 years with this car from these gentlemen. And then in 2000, we called it the Triple Crown. That team, to finish their final year, they won Daytona, the 12 Hours of Sebring, and the 24-hour Le Mans, the endurance racing Triple Crown, with the cars that you see here. I mean, production-based, American-designed GT cars. And then the customers took over. They won 2 more international FIA GT World Championships. In that period, 98 to 2005, they won more than 16 national championships. I'm not talking about your local autocross. This is like the French GT Championship against Saleen, Porsche, Marcos, Lister. 16 championships from customers on their own. They bought a car from Chrysler and continued racing it. And continued to dominate all the way through to 2005. And you can see some of the other major victories. I ran out of space. That's just some of them. And now we're on to our panelists here. And we're lucky to have, you probably learned this morning, the Viper production team did a lot more than their titles may say. They wore a lot of hats, and that was even more so on the race team. So what you see here is not all of what these guys did. But Neil Hanneman was the first program manager, picked from Roy Schoberg and Francois Castaigne to start the program, really in late 94, but he was there in 95 to 97. Gene Martindale here, second from my right, was basically in the engineering intern program, young guy, not finished too long out of school, and worked on suspension, braking, and was actually the first person to test that GTSR P1 at the proving ground. And then to Gene's right, we have Ken Nowak, who had a lot of rally experience with Chrysler. He handled lighting, bodywork, and many other things. Dick Myers, right here to Gene's left, he took over as program manager for Neil, but as Neil mentioned earlier, he had a lot of chassis knowledge from his own racing that he brought into the program. And we have Ray Schilling down there in the perfect vintage Knaska Southwind racing shirt that I love. That he did drafting work, CFD, fabrication, among other things. And via Zoom, hopefully we'll be able to talk to him. And we have Tommy Archer, who was a primary development driver for this car, in addition to his long career racing numerous other things, SCCA championships, and he went on to drive for Viper Team Orica all the way through the program through 2000. We've got a great panel here, and I guess I'll try to start seating the discussion with just a few questions. So Neil, if you could, why did you wait until the GTS came out to have a race program? What did that offer you as a platform that maybe the RT10 didn't?
Well, we weren't really waiting. I think it was just a decision by Chrysler to go race. And we actually pulled ahead a lot of the 96 components. So, for example, the engine wasn't actually even in volume production yet. So our race cars were built with prototypes, tool parts, and we were discovering some of the production problems early on with the race cars. So, but again, the 96 engine was, quite a bit better than the 95 and earlier ones. So it was definitely to our advantage to pull that ahead.
Thank you. And it's kind of interesting, when I was learning about this program, everyone today is familiar with computer-aided design, everything's drawn on 3D models, but really the GTSR was one of the first cars that Chrysler did digital design. And Ray Schilling was involved in doing some of that design work and some of the things that came out of it that took some growing pains, let's say. So maybe Ray, you could tell us about how that drafting went.
Well, it's kind of weird because that was when I first started computer-aided design. And my first job was to draw the Gen 1 frame. And it's like, so I'm learning how to draw in CATIA and documenting the car because nothing was there. So we did the first one. It was all hand drawings. It was all drawn on a board. So it was kind of thrown in my lap. Here, draw this. Okay, well, I had to learn really quick because steep learning curve.
And then when parts like this started showing up, the first set of carbon bodywork, what happened?
Wow, we had to adjust up just about everything. Didn't quite fit. No, it didn't quite fit. So everything was just like the production car. I had massage. Well, we got better at it as we built a few cars. A lot of it was Renard had to change some things.
And like Ray was saying, the original Viper was drawn on drawing boards. So it was a transition to computer-aided design. It wasn't like Ray had the original Viper to work from. He had to create that and do the race stuff. But some of the things worked. I think, Dick, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't we do a CAD set of headers? And they fit right in, right? We made these, redesigned. The headers he designed, he set them up, Borla, they made headers, and we were wondering, how are they gonna fit, right? We were thinking that, and they fit. So, we had some successes.
And the thing is, too, is they were made out of Inconel, so they weren't cheap headers. They were like 15 grand.
Oh, we didn't pay for those.
Whatever. But I remember going to Francois' office and he said, well, just go with Inconel. I was like, wow, this dude's serious.
Once that stuff started to come together and you started to work out the bugs, eventually you ended up with the car you see on screen is the car sitting to your left. That is chassis P1, the development mule. That's actually the unveiling at Pebble Beach in August of '95. But the first person that actually got to test it with any eagerness is Gene Martindale. And Gene, I remember when he told me that it was wild to hear you were 22, 23, and Neil trusts you to take this race car out and crash it as part of your job?
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised at the amount of leeway that Neil did give me. Quite honestly, I had done some club racing. I started in go-karts and did some club racing, but I was really young. I mean, I was only a couple years into my career at Chrysler, and Neil threw a lot at me, and I really appreciate that he did trust me, and hopefully didn't lay down too much anyway. But yeah, to be able to drive that car on the proving grounds, I just couldn't believe that, a kid from small town Indiana growing up on a farm to do something like that. It was pretty crazy for me, I'll tell you.
Thank you. And I don't know, Neil, if we can ask Tommy a question at this point.
Yeah, okay, so the Tommy thing, we got him on Zoom, but he can't hear us. So,
And actually, just in the nick of time, there he is in the car in 1995.
yeah,
We were going to ask Tommy about one of the first times he tested the car on track. He had a bit of an unwanted passenger that joined him on a lap.
yeah. So let's get Tommy on the screen. And
Okay, as we can see, welcome.
he can't hear us, but I just told him to go ahead, so.
Okay, I got the word from Neil to go. And my question and answer was what it was like to drive the car the first time. First time that I drove it was down at Sebring. And I drove around and I went on the straightaway and I couldn't keep my foot on the gas pedal for the whole straightaway because the exhaust system was so hot that it was burning my feet. And then they brought in Andy Wallace, who was a British race car driver because our test lead guy didn't think that I had the qualities to go fast enough, which we proved wrong later. But he came in, he says, I think the bloody thing is on fire. And it was the exhaust was so hot, it was burning the insulation in the side pods. But it was smoking and hot. And so, it was just evolution stuff that had to be done. And, that lasted a long time. The heat was, I remember racing in Texas and we actually cut styrofoam cups apart and put them inside our shoes to insulate our foot from the 210-degree gas pedal. But the first time we go, it was just, basically finding out what we felt it needed to go to the next step. And we moved on to other tracks, and we drove it at a lot of different tracks. It was actually a fairly well-handling car by the time. Matter of fact, it almost raced in the 24 Hours of Daytona because it was faster than the race cars that came with the team. The test car was the fastest of the three. So that was pretty much fun. I think probably one of the big stories that people remember in the development was Neil called me up and said, hey, we'd like you to drive this car. It has an exceptional problem of Road Atlanta. This was when Road Atlanta was the old Road Atlanta that didn't have turn 10 and 11. And just had a big dip before you went up to the bridge. And it was changing lanes at 175 miles an hour. And you would go from the far right to the far left. And we ended up taking, at that time it had two byways in the back. And we took one of them off and we gained 7 miles an hour and the front end stayed on the ground. And I don't remember what we were testing at the time, but they said, we want you to give us the meter readings when you get on the back straightaway. And the test car had the gauges down by the shifter. And so I came on the back straightaway, and the lap before I had seen this big bird on the side of the track, and it took off. And when I came back to the back straightaway, the next, whatever it was, a minute and 20-some seconds later, they asked me to give me the gauge readings, and while I was doing that, I'm assuming it was the same bird, swooped in front of the car and windshield broke. Part of the bird was in the car, part of the bird was out of the car. And the funny part about it was Francois Castaigne had flown in on the corporate jet and wanted to watch the car go around the track. And we made it 1.5 laps, and I came in and I remember calling in and said, hey, we've got a partner. And he said, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, there's part of an animal inside my car. And we got in there, and a big hole in the windshield, and the spare windshield was an hour away at the race shop, because when's the last time you needed a windshield for a race car? So Francois got to see like 1.5 laps of me go around the track. But we progressed from there into a very fun car to drive, and there was a lot of stories like that that happened. And we got the windshield replaced and finished the test. We went to Charlotte, about a month or so later, and I'm going around the track, I'm going around the banking, and there's this big bird up on the wall. And I said, he's back. What do you mean? I said, there's a big bird on the wall. I'm going to come in before he hits us. So that was cool, and they think, from what I've heard over the years, is that the hot running into the windshield, when they put the new one in, it wasn't properly sealed properly when they put it in. Back then it was glued to the car. And I was testing at the Chrysler Proving Grounds, and it got going on the long straightaway, and the windshield separated and it blew the roof off. And when the roof was being pulled off, it pulled the car up in the air, spun me into a 360, and I ended up going backwards down the track. And when I stopped, I said, well, we got a problem. I said, what's wrong? He said, we need a new roof, and I need a new pair of pants. They found it. They found the roof, came back to where I was, and they put it back on, and we finished the test. They taped it up, and glued it. And we had a lot of weird days like that testing, because we always had something new. And I'll leave it at that. You guys can send me another question. I can hear you, by the way.
Well, thank you, Tommy. That was great. So we said we were trying to make this race car that Tommy was experiencing all these wonderful events in, but bring things from the street car and improve it. And if you look closely at these two cars, you'll see a number of differences. Some things you'll recognize right from the production car, but for example, the side mirrors. If you look at the white car over there, P1, it's got mirrors, which Ken Noah can tell us where they came from, but if you look at the chassis 7 over here, that one at Le Mans, they're different, although familiar. So Ken, you can explain maybe how you used your expertise to bring some of these different production parts to the race car and why they were beneficial and how they came to be.
Well, everybody on the team is kind of has the mandate to win the race. So every part on the car is involved in racing, and every part on the car is scrutinized for function and for weight savings and for just application to the vehicle. Those mirrors on the 97 car, formerly the 5 car, are the production wiper outside rear view mirrors. And those came from the Dodge Stealth. And they were the powered version of the Dodge Stealth mirror, because up until the coupe, we were given the mandate to keep manual outside mirrors in the Viper, just in keeping with the bare bones, raw sports car theme. I actually had to take the motors out of the production Stealth mirrors to put them on production Roadster. One day I was walking through the shop, just thinking, you're always thinking, and I picked up the mirrors from the Prowler. I said, wow, these are light. And I weighed them both, and I think it was about a 7-pound per mirror difference between what we had on the Prowler and what we had on the race car. So I carried the Prowler mirror over to one of the designers. I don't know if it was Ray, but I asked him to machine the base of the Prowler mirror so that it fit the contour of the GTS Outdoor and save about 14 pounds a car. And that's what's on the car that won the Mans. You don't save 14 pounds on a race car because everybody is chasing weight in every way, shape, and form. You save an ounce or two at a time. Every part we put on the car that came back from Orica, for example, had holes drilled in it. I can't think of anything that came back from them that didn't have holes drilled in it. But they knew how to make the car lighter. And as a bonus, those mirrors are also more aerodynamic. And nobody realized we'd made the change when we went back to Le Mans, so I didn't say anything.
Thanks, Ken. And it's interesting, you go through all these small changes. They're looking for grams, ounces, and in this case, pounds. And testing the daylights out of this car for more than 24 hours at a time. And now Le Mans approaching, and they have all this work into it. And we're going to ask Mr. Myers to tell us a story about the car that won Le Mans the first time at the final shakedown test a week before the race. What happened?
So, about a week before the race, we would do a rebuild of each of the cars, preparing for practice at Le Mans, and run a shakedown test at Baldwin Car Circuit, which was very close to the Orca shops. And that particular car was the third of three going to the race. The first two were brand new cars, and this was from 97 carried over into 98. So it's getting a shakedown test, and a problem developed with retention of the injectors to the intake manifold going down the longest straight. So the injectors actually popped up out of position and began to spray that wonderful Euro 98 super gasoline onto the headers. So I'm in England at the time, getting on an airplane, a supplier, and getting on an airplane, and I get a phone call from Orca. And the first words were, "We've had a fear." I'm like, fear. Wait, say that again? We've had a fear. I don't understand. We've had a flambe extraordinaire. Oh, okay. What car? Whole thing, right? So, I'm in the air. The car basically burned to the ground, to the back wheels, center line of the back wheels, right to the ground. Couldn't put the fire out. Huge fire. Fuel pumps running, lots of fuel pumps. And so I get to work, and here's this burned up Hulk. Okay, I'm like, we're supposed to be on a truck in 24 hours here. Each car had 8 mechanics, and they rearranged the schedule into a 24-hour cycle, and they basically stripped that car and repainted it. Repainted the chassis, put all new bodywork, all new parts, because fortunately we were financed well enough and had learned enough in prototype racing and endurance racing and to have spares, lots of spares. So in 24 hours, that car got loaded on a truck, race ready. Go to Le Mans, take it out for a first shakedown. Power steering was a little late. They rebled the brakes, rebled the power steering, and I can only tell there was a little bit of fire extinguishing left behind the seat. And I think we put it on the front row and qualified. Yeah. So that's when a whole team is focused on a single goal with the appropriate passion for young guys like Gene and old guys, older guys, this guy, that guy over there. There was when I first went to work there, and I had come in from outside the biker group, right? So there's Roy's desk, and on the wall behind it was a motto written. It was called "Make It Happen," and that's what we did. We made it happen every single day.
Well, thank you. And to me, it's just crazy to think, when you look at that car, it won the most grueling sports car race in the world and was literally burnt to a crisp a week before. It's pretty amazing that they were able to pull that off. With Spirit, like you see in the photo here, it didn't seem like they had a bad time at work either. I should have mentioned earlier that, a lot of times people are familiar with Orca because when the team started winning everything, they were working with Orca at the track. But behind the scenes, there were a lot of other contributors here in the United States, including J&P Motorsport down in Norcross, Georgia. Kanaska Southwind was the first team to race the cars out of Birmingham, Alabama. Reynard in the United Kingdom made the lightweight carbon fiber bodywork, and then a lot of testing was done throughout the United States in Ohio and Arizona at the Chelsea Proving Grounds. And then you had Caldwell Development, who handled the factory engine program in Vista, California. So there's a lot of late credit that's given to Orca, and they were a key partner, but the car really was developed, especially in the early years here in the United States, with companies here in the United States and people at Chrysler. I guess at this point, can we get some questions in the audience? Anyone should? I'll try to run a microphone back to you.
Yeah, while he's doing that, I just want to recognize, we talked about building cars in Detroit, and Jeff Petrelli's in the back row here. I'll get Jeff to stand up. He's been his life as a UAW mechanic. And he's in some of these pictures. In fact, the one with the 4 guys at the front of the car making a joke. 2 of the guys were from Orca, and the other 2 were Jeff and Jeff Reese. So Jeff Petrelli was involved in building, and I think Sean had it up there, the first 13 cars, and including this car right here, that won Le Mans, was initially built right here in Detroit by UAW mechanics, particularly Jeff. So just wanted to recognize him for that.
Thank you for that.
You didn't mention how you fixed the flambe extraordinaire.
Oh, God. Okay, so basically, when I got there, the car was stripped of everything that was burned, engine out, transmission out, everything out, right? And they then sandblasted everything that was burned because it was a powder-coated car. Replaced the floor panels that are magnesium. They are riveted and bonded onto the bottom. So it's a pretty intense, complex process to get that all put back together. Then in went new wiring harnesses, new engine, new transmission, new radiator, everything was running. Leak? We changed the design. Okay, so there was some epoxy involved, all the injectors inside the spool and the plastic part. And we went back, when we ran into such problems, we would go back to Chrysler Laboratories, which is staffed with all the guys that wear the white jackets. Yeah, there we are, look at that. There's that young guy on the left, it's really cool. Yeah. Yeah. Neil's saying, why are you taking my picture? Yeah. So around the clock, 24 hours, 24 mechanics, 8 from each team, put that car back together, completely back together, reran it, put it in the hauler, and got to Le Mans about 4 hours later than it was supposed to. That's dedication. That's dedication not only from the American side, but it was dedication from the French, and Oryx dedication to us.
So starting with the production car, what did you hear from Orica or others about the, I guess, integrity or the stability or what that GTS was as a production car to base a race car off? What broke and how did you fix it that went then into production?
Well, like I say, we were a little ahead of 96. Actually, in June of 96, I don't know that production cars were sold yet, were they? Yeah, so I'm not sure if we pulled a fast one over the line because it was supposed to be a production car, but I think they looked both ways. But, you know, I remember the cylinder head castings cracked, I think, in the engine because we had some early castings. And those were all, well, we made tooling for, actually, I think we made different tooling for the race cars, and they took like 50 of those for the first production cars. Yeah. Yeah, so that was one thing I can remember where we improved the breed before the 96 car even got to production.
Any other questions?
So you mentioned epoxy on that fix of the fuel rail. Is it because you weren't able to homologate any parts to like hold down the fuel rail in time, essentially? So you guys just kind of glue and hopes and prayers, which is kind of awesome, I think.
I mean, you kind of have to look at where the world was in that time frame where Chrysler was with fuel injection, which was kind of a new thing, and how you do fuel rails and how you hold injectors in and all that sort of thing. Now it's a bonded and clipped, and the injector plugged into a Boss, and the Boss was bonded into a carbon fiber intake manifold because that was new for us too. So the experiment didn't go quite right first time.
I think also some of you may have seen at Le Mans in '97, the cars were still white with blue stripes, and there's a fairly famous shot of one hitting a wall and bursting into flames. Everyone remembers that. But one of the things that came out of that, can't really see it in this picture, but at the base of the windshield, they actually put 2 external kill switches in so that if a driver wanted to get out of there in a hurry and didn't turn the fuel pumps off, a marshal could walk up with a fire extinguisher and hit the switch, and maybe you'd have some hope of not burning the whole car to the ground. But that's where that came from, was an actual accident in the race the year prior to winning 24. Any other questions?
Why do you think since Viper hasn't really like captured the magic of its original car. Like this dominated everything in the late 90s, early 2000s. Not even just IMSA, but like Zaxbyt, I remember, took it to Nürburgring, dominated for so many years that they tried to basically ban the car by putting a displacement limit on the cars, and they blocked off 2 cylinders and still raced and came on second. I mean, this car was insane. But why hasn't there been one since, do you think, that's been like way to that level?
Well, it depends on the rules. Like you say, they kept putting restrictions on, and maybe it wasn't necessarily the Viper, but for example, if you had a 8-liter motor, you get a smaller restrictor. We're the only ones with an 8-liter motor. And even when we first started designing the car, there were competing sanctioning bodies. So we had Le Mans, there was a series called the EPR series, and that was going to morph into the FIA series. And they had little different rules. And so it was tough to design the car. I don't maybe remember which one, but I think I just picked the rule book. I think it was the Le Mans rule book that says, look, we're going to design a Le Mans car, and then we'll have to adapt it for whatever the other rules change to. And it was actually Le Mans GT2 rules, or the original car that raced in GT1 was actually a GT2 car of Wolf's Clothing. So, or Chief's Clothing, well, Wolf's Clothing, I guess, whatever. It was a GT2 car. We made a few changes, but we were, in 96, we were actually undercover looking forward at the rules. So 97 Le Mans rules, and which segued nicely into the 97 GT2 class. So we were, rather than designing a full-up GT1 car, we really looking at a GT2 car. But the rules change all the time, and I think this car, and also I appreciate Sean putting together all this history and keeping track of it. I mean, he knows more than I've forgotten so much about what went on, but Sean's keeping track, which is great. But the history where customer teams ran from 2000 to 2005, they just took the car and without any help from us. I don't know, you weren't helping them, were you, Jim? Those customer guys? No.
Occasionally.
No answer. I suppose the guys would answer questions, but there was no background involvement in those race teams.
And just so it's clear to everybody, I mean, this was the first factory Viper race car that you could actually purchase turnkey. I'm sure some of you are familiar with, after this came the competition coupes, the ACRX, eventually a second round of GTSR, and then the GT3R that raced in IMSA through 2016. But this was the first factory race car you could buy from the company. And when they came out to customers in 1999, the price was $325,000 in 99. Originally, I think you started at 200 grand, but then as things expanded pretty quickly, the price grew. But compared to the competition, a McLaren F1 GTR was $1 million. So you were getting a bargain. And I've interviewed a number of customer teams in the years since, and one thing they said they appreciated that these guys did, Porsche was the de facto car to have if you were a customer. You could run a Viper for 2 to 3 times as long as a Porsche before you'd have to replace components. So it was actually a bargain for these race teams, which is why you saw for over half a decade they became the customer car to have, and they won, as this gentleman mentioned, at the Nürburgring, at Spa, in Brazil, in Japan. I mean, they went all over the world. They were a good value for the customer. And one thing I wanted to ask Ken, actually, some of that value came from the Chrysler engineers and their experience. If you look at the white car, on the rocker panels, you'll see it's a one-piece carbon fiber single section. But if you look at the Le Mans winning car, there's actually a metal sill below the carbon. Why is that, Ken?
Well, I was going to try to explain the differences between the two cars, because there are quite a few. I mean, I'm looking at them and they look very similar, but the Renard part made in the UK is a carbon fiber side sill. And you got to insulate that dramatically, and it doesn't do a good job of rejecting heat. It doesn't dissipate heat along its length the way aluminum does. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to take the production aluminum sill, make some modifications, and put the side splitter on it in aluminum. And I did a little of this and a little of that, and ended up with a part that rejected heat much better, so it made the car cooler inside. It didn't tend to burn and flake the paint off of itself, and it weighed exactly the same as the carbon fiber piece, and saved $7,000 a side, because the side sills on that car were over $7,500 a piece out of Renard. And so that was cost savings, but it was practical cost savings because I was trying to make the car better. And the aluminum is a better dissipator, it's a better heat rejection material than carbon fiber is. And it was a production part. There were a whole lot of differences also. If you look at the 97 car, it's got some kind of funny wheel lips on it. That's because during development, we learned that making the front track, I think it was 60 millimeters wider, made the car faster. We could go into the corners harder. And the additional frontal area, the motor could overcome that. So the benefit was the wider track, and we'll take the downside of the wider front end. So that's a crude attempt to go out and put a modification onto the car so that we could retool to this condition. And this condition is the way we ended up, I think probably after about a year and a half of development, that was the end result. A totally different front end. And lighting was also a critical item. At Le Mans, it's 24 hours, you got to turn the lights on at some point. And typically, you're going to lose a little bit of lap time at night because you're driving on headlights. And we were lucky enough, well, I was lucky enough to have some contacts from programming experience with Hella. And I found out they were doing an HID development program. And they agreed to put together some special 7-inch HID lamps. And at the time, the technology was new, and there were all sorts of ballasts. I think there were 2 ballasts per lamp. And these are big square boxes, and they weighed a couple of pounds, and there were wires all over the place, and then you had these big lamps. Well, I was all excited and couldn't get them to Le Mans in time, so I put them in my luggage and got on the airplane and flew to France. If you want to ever run your luggage through the through the X-ray machine in France, when it's got all that inside of it, the sound of Uzis clicking is deafening. And they were all speaking French around me. I know nothing about anything. So it's like I'm just kind of quietly standing there, and all I could say was, "Yellow." Oh, he said, "I'm all right." So they'll pat me on the back, and they're all set, close up my luggage, and I'm on my way.
That's one of my favorite stories, certainly. You know, other parts of production car that I'm sure some of you have second-gen ACRs. I mean, you might notice your Multimatic dampers. I mean, that came from a tie-in to the GTSR, and Gene was involved in the transition directly between Coney, Penske, Multimatic. Maybe you could enlighten us on how that came to be and how these people saw on their cars they ended up with Multimatic dampers.
Yeah, speaking of that, one of our big mandates was that we use as many production suppliers as possible. Francois Mustang dictated that we use as many current production suppliers to the street Viper, be it Michelin tires, Brembo brakes, Ford Warner for the transmission, all those, they can go on and on and on. Danner, and we can just go through the whole list. But so the idea was that the race car would improve the breed, right? And that was for us on the whole vehicle side. That was also with our suppliers, like we just mentioned. So they would also learn and improve. And those things that were in, for instance, the Ford Warner gearbox are still in there to this day in the trimming boxes. It's incredible what happened. But anyway, so one of those things was we were using Coney shocks at the time. So we went to Coney, and Coney actually did already develop race parts, race shocks. And so the initial shock we went with was actually what they were currently using in the IndyCar series. So it was their state-of-the-art shock. And we worked with them, worked with their engineers, and we did that for a couple years. And honestly, we just over time felt that they weren't giving us quite the service we wanted. the product wasn't bad, but some of the machining wasn't good. We thought the quality wasn't where it needed to be. And also the actual service, like the people coming to the track to help us rebuild the shocks and tune them at the track. So Penske approached us, and Penske, you guys know Roger Penske, he started his own shock company for his IndyCar program, and they were kind of the pinnacle at that time in America. And we talked to their engineers, and we met with them, and long story short, we went with Penske, and they gave us incredible parts and incredible service both in America and in Europe. And that really set us a big leap forward. And then, like the next year, Chrysler started talking to Multimatic to use their dampers on their road car. So again, you know, moving the street car improves, the race car improves the street car, we switched then to the Multimatic dampers. So that was kind of the evolution, and that was basically the background behind it. But it was very interesting, and dampers are incredibly important in a race car to make the car handle and go faster on the racetrack.
It's always interesting to me. I mean, you were almost fortunate in a way that the factory suppliers were Brembo and Michelin. I mean, you had some great partners to work with that led to some success on the racetrack. And unfortunately, other manufacturers benefited from that once this program ended. Their yellow cars, and they got tires and drivers in some cases that helped them out that were really developed on Viper.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Ken mentioned the fact that we had fender flares on the front of the original P1 car. Part of the reason was we were at that first test that Tommy was talking about earlier at Sebring, and we're like, we just couldn't get the front tires to work, and we all put our heads together with the Michelin guys, and we decided, hey, we need to widen the front track width to load the front tires better, and that was that. That was kind of that moved us forward there, and something I guess like our first Daytona race, we put in, how many transmissions did we put in that first race? Was it 6 during 24 hours?
Too many.
Yeah, we put literally, I think it was 5 or 6 transmissions in a 24-hour race. But later on, that transmission became bulletproof in the race car and the road car, and that was just the learning, you know, the teething pains that we went through. You know, Neil was mentioning the engine and stuff earlier. All those things is what this car was able to produce.
It's crazy to me. I don't know how many of you have ever had the pleasure of putting a transmission in your Viper, but the factory guys got down to where I'm pretty sure they did 1 in 22 minutes in a race. So I mean, in a 24-hour race, you know, you lose 22 minutes, that's a lot, but you're not out of the race. And I personally had the joy of doing it, and I certainly can't get anywhere close to that. It's incredible the proficiency that the mechanics even were able to reach on this program to swap that heavy gearbox in that short amount of time and still possibly get on the podium.
And don't forget the car's screaming hot, right? Because you come in, you know, running as hard as you can on the racetrack, the car's hot, everything's hot on it. And then you say, let's change out a hot transmission inside the hot race car.
There's been some other stories I've heard, maybe Ray can share one with us, where there's a lot of glamour associated with this. You know, you're standing on the podium at Le Mans in front of the world, but to think that where some of these cars came from, you know, at Canasca Southwind, you said Birmingham, Alabama, some of the first cars, there was a way that you were trying to track where some of your road visitors were living for lunch. Maybe you could explain how that worked.
Yeah, we'll have a great time. Charlie's shop was not the best in the world. So we used to go to lunch at this place called Dreamland, and they served ribs. And we'd always have a couple ribs left over, so we'd sauce them up really good, put them in the middle of the floor, and then the next day we could tell where the rats took them. So then we knew where the rats lived, so we could kill the rats.
And from that shop, you had car finishing 10th overall at Le Mans.
Yes.
I don't know if Mr. Penske would appreciate that, but I thought it was pretty interesting.
And if we'd have had double lip seals on the GT1 car, I think we would have done a whole lot better. The carbon just ate up the bearings.
I mean, it's pretty wild. They source wheel bearings from Riley and Scott. Maybe some of you are familiar with them. They made Trans Am cars, worked on Indy cars, and eventually came to work on the later edition GTSR. But these guys were pushing their parts further than they had to higher speeds with a production car. You know, the first year Viper went to Le Mans 96, it was clocked as the second fastest car down the famous Mulsanne straightaway, faster than the prototypes. And there were instances, I think, where maybe Tommy could tell us, I'm not sure if we could get that to him, Neil. I think he had some angry prototype drivers visiting him that were trying to draft and get by him and couldn't.
Tommy said he could hear us.
Maybe we can get Tommy back on the screen and he can answer that. Do you
Just
remember
woke
that
up.
all?
Wake up.
If if you can hear us, I think you told me once there were prototype drivers who were frustrated that they couldn't pass you in the Viper due to the high power, and you often had some visitors in your pit box, maybe?
Well, yeah, it was in the early years when we were running unrestricted. The car was one of the fastest at Daytona. I think we were second and third fastest, and they would use us as their drag. Obviously, they were way lighter, and they could get by us, under braking and stuff like that. But Le Mans was interesting because over there at night, and not a lot of drivers wanted to drive at night because we had to have the yellow light. But we worked fast down the straightaway, and they would dislike when you didn't let them go by. But we also had our race to run, and so we were a little stingy with that. But it was interesting when they would catch you. They could catch you, but then to pass you was a different thing because we were just so fast straight away. That was interesting.
Thanks, Tommy.
We were talking about pictures earlier. There's a famous picture of, if you follow the mod, when the Mercedes had a problem with their cars would take off and fly. I know people remember that, but Mercedes cars would actually just go airborne right off the track. And there's a famous picture of a Mercedes in the air, and it's shot down the Mulsanne Straight. If you look closely at the picture, there's a Viper that looks like it's right under the Mercedes.
Yes.
Well, so the Viper the Mercedes was a little behind the Viper, but Tommy was driving that Viper at the time, and I don't know if Tommy can hear you, but what he told me was, I looked in the mirror, there was a Mercedes. I looked in the mirror again, there was no Mercedes. I wonder where it went. I looked in the Mercedes the third time, and it's back on the track on its roof. Something like that. But anyway, just famous pictures. Tommy had an interesting view. He had probably the most unique view of that whole crash of anybody.
And that picture is in the slideshow. I don't know if it's already popped up or not, but you might see it on.
That just straight up in the air. It's like a cartoon when you watch it. It's unbelievable. It ended up in the crowd, but nobody got it.
I think they launched 2 that weekend.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but it's an iconic photo, obviously, and thankfully it didn't land on a Viper that went on a wind.
One thing, somebody just mentioned restrictors, and I always found it fascinating. The restrictors on these 8-liter engines, we had to run 2 restrictors. You could not get a golf ball through either one of them. This microphone will not pass through the air intake on these race motors that were winning Le Mans.
And if you're not familiar with that, basically, even back in those days, they tried to equalize the performance. So if you have an 8-liter V10 Viper racing against a 3.6-liter turbo Porsche, they tried to balance the air going into the engine to make it a little more even, but what they couldn't do is balance the torque of the V10. So there are many times you'd see the Viper running around and it'd sound quiet, almost at low RPM, but it's leaving black marks coming out of the corner just with torque. And the other manufacturers that make higher RPM engines like Ferrari and Porsche, in a 24-hour race when you're running with all these different kinds of cars on track, that torque and the reliability at running a lower RPM with a naturally aspirated engine, even though it was heavily restricted, really favored the Viper. And the great part was, every one of your street cars came with at least an 8-liter V10. So it's not like some of the other brands that had to put a bigger engine in their car to be competitive. They already had that. So it worked out fairly well.
We had to choke it down to go racing.
Are there any other questions from the audience? I have some PI data from the cars.
Start finish line at Daytona was around 190. 212, almost saying.
Well, I think over 212. I remember personally, because in '99 I drove, I think it was P3, a car that was, at that time, actually literally taken out of a museum in Florida. And I drove that car as a privateer team. I was lucky that some of these guys, I was off the program by then. I didn't even work for Chrysler by then, did I? But some parts showed up for the car. That was kind of nice. But I was trying to beat the Corvettes and qualify for the privateer car. and if I burned a spark plug on my fast lap, but it was 197 is what I went across this start finish line at.
And we had to put a chicane at Paul Ricard. We used to run 24-hour tests at the Paul Ricard circuit in France. We had to add a chicane into the backstretch because we were over 200 in the dark in 33-degree weather.
But again, I think Dick said the Lamont track, it was like 212, I think. When they were complaining to Tommy about us being, faster, I think it was about that speed.
And again, I mean, if you're not familiar with it, these prototype cars, they go at incredibly high speed through the corners, but even on Le Mans is unique because it's an 8.5-mile track made of public roads. It's one of the few places you can go those speeds. But even at Daytona, which everyone knows for the Daytona 500, to go close to 200 on a closed circuit, not an 8-mile-long stretch, is pretty incredible, especially with a production-based car using the factory block crank castings, cylinder head castings. I mean, certainly the engine was modified, but they were starting from a production part. If you look at a lot of their competitors' race cars, almost nothing is shared with the street car, maybe the rear mirror. But that wasn't the case with Viper, and that's certainly what attracted me to this program, was how successful they were with a car that was no kidding based on what you could buy. Any other questions? Wes, in the back?
I follow your stuff. How close are you to your goal of chasing down all the Jacksons? Have you ever get close?
Actually, I've found all the GTSRs. That's taken a few years, but I think we know where they all are now. Unfortunately, only a couple are no longer with us. The competition coupes and some of the later cars that didn't race at quite a high level, those are still missing out there in the world, still looking for them. But GTSRs, I can tell you where all those are and what they did. It's pretty fun. Maybe some of you saw yesterday at the Monterey Jet Center, they had an auction. One of these factory cars went up for sale, and I believe it bid to $885,000 with fees and didn't quite meet reserve. So the cars are increasing in value, especially these GTSRs. I think on record are the most valuable Vipers ever built, even more than the street cars. So they continue to increase in value as the history starts to be appreciated as time goes on. So I certainly like that.
Yeah, well, I was gone from Chrysler before they shut it down, but, and Gene was too, so I guess.
I stayed till 2023. Minivans, really exciting. Jessica?
I ended up going to NASCAR. I worked on truck and Xfinity Series and the Cup Series. Then I worked on Pro Stock. Then I worked on Pro Stock One Car. Yeah, it just kept going and going. I worked at a wind level. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just went back to, I was kind of a jack of all trades, and I went back into kind of production work and getting the Gen 3 car ready for production. That was great. That was a wonderful project, and I did a lot of the prototype stuff. They just kind of handed it to me and said, here, let me one of these. So you might break it. So they would make it and they would break it. We had one little thing that nobody seems to know about, and Dick Meyer started a little ceremony when we would name each of the race cars with our daughters' first names. And they were written on the top of the road.
Which daughter is yours? Which one? This is your daughter's. That's Galen.
That's Kaylee. I don't know all the rest of the names, and I haven't found my Andrea yet. I know we put it on the car, and I can't figure out which car we put my
So
daughter's
C6
name
was
on.
my daughter, which is Megan, the red car. It's not here. So they all signed at the top of the road page.
So these guys, they've got me calling up owners all over the world and saying, can you take a mirror and go out to your roof and look on the back and see if a name's written there, and why do you want to know that? And Unfortunately, through the process of time, since they were just written in marker, we've had a hard time finding these names, especially when cars like this have been on fire multiple times. But we're still trying. It's a fun Easter egg hunt.
There was a little personal note, I don't know if not many people know that. It's kind of cool.
And you had a story? That's mine.
Okay, so we'll talk about speed of the Viper for a second. So we're at Le Mans 98, and at that time, the lap record for a GT2 car was about 4 minutes, 1 second, something like 4, just barely 4. And one of the things we learned from Orica was about how not to get re-regulated. So we ran to a lap time target a lot because the car had such tremendous torque. And of course, which annihilated tires pretty quick. Michelin worked really hard to come up with a tire that would stay underneath this car. So we're at Le Mans, we were told drivers cannot go faster than 4 minutes flat. That's the lap record. If we go really fast, we're going to get re-regulated. Let's be cool. Drivers, of course, weren't happy with that at all. So now they're having a contest to see who can get closest to 4 minutes flat. And we see the brakes on a 100-yard fixed start finish line. And these guys are talking to each other on the rudimentary radio system we had until they got to 400.29. The next day, we allowed one of the drivers to run 359.5 or something like that, break the record. And, you know, the press is all excited with the front page. So drivers came to us and said, like, we're really frustrated. You're not letting us run this car like the battery run. I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. There's a timing beacon at the end of the Mulsanne. So I said, you run flat out from the start-finish line to the timing beacon, and you putter around and go to the timing beacon again and run flat out to the start-finish line. We'll put the two halves of the lap together, and you can run a fast lap because it doesn't show up on the timing board that way. So 10 lap hole tires, not qualifying tires. The car ran a 352. That's what we had in our hands. And the drivers, realizing that at that point, got together. They qualified 1, 2, 3. And when the green dropped, they pulled over and let all the Porsches by. And Porsche's strategy went right out the window at that point. They had no idea what to do because they were going to chase Vipers for 24 hours. Now what? They all crashed out. It worked.
It's interesting to hear the backstories that you can't tell from the stands necessarily, and that's why I've certainly enjoyed getting to know these guys a little bit and trying to write this stuff down. We've got time for just a couple more questions. Mr. Willie in the back.
I've asked this of the production guys, so Kenny has answered this before about production. But when did you guys realize you guys were going to be legends with this race car?
This morning.
The car is the legend, and when the car won Le Mans 3 times in a row, that was kind of a hint.
I think Daytona overall. No, well, that's 2000, but I was happy at the first FIA race in 97, which that car was at, and we finished 1-2, and the way the car ran, the way everything worked, I realized we're done. We're done. Now it's just a matter of the race teams can do everything they need to do with this. And that's when things started happening. Like in 97, we won the FIA championship. We did miss Le Mans in 97, but then, it all just happened. So that, Nürburgring, 1997, I was there with Jerry Mallicoat, who's no longer with us. I don't know if any of you guys were there. I think it was just me and Jerry. Tommy was driving with Justin, and that's when I knew that we had it.
I think I remember the first time we went to Daytona for the 24 hours, and you and I were walking back from a bathroom or some pop break or something like that, and it was about 12 hours into the race, and we looked up and we're up on the leaderboard and on the tower. And that's when you looked at me and said, we're here.
Well, we were on the leaderboard, but I would say then, yeah.
And that's one thing that kind of attracted me to the cars is, that same car you're looking at that won Le Mans, it was the first race winner the year before and it looked totally different. So under that skin, there's more history. These cars evolve over time, like unlike a street car, they kind of live multiple lives. So you can have one car that maybe looked 10 different ways across its lifetime, and it's kind of fun to uncover that in addition to searching for family ties under the skin and everything else. One last question, anyone else?
You might have already said this, but it's
Yeah.
What she asked?
She asked, is all this history and pictures and whatnot going to be available in a book? So I have been working on that for quite some time. I have the website where you can see the history of each car. That's no cost or anything. Every one of the GTSRs is documented on there, but all these stories don't fit on the website. So after I wrote the racing chapter in Maurice's last book, I started trying to put together just the racing history in a book, and that became so big. Now we're just doing a book on GTSR first, with hopes to then cover the later programs. But yeah, about 50,000 words in and 20,000 photos, and it's taken me a long time, but that is the goal. So yes, working on that. But in the meantime, if you visit the site, you can at least see the history of each one of these cars and the names of all the people I've spoken to so far. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Maurice. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Roger.
I got one question for you. Obviously, endurance racing has to do with durability of the vehicle. And the reality is, what had real success with durability is what somebody races that doesn't happen by accident. That's an engineering, a good job you guys. What you guys do is so durable, they were able to do so many races for so many years.
Yeah, well, it started with design. And for example, we looked at the whole car, we knew what parts were going to work and what weren't. In fact, the racing industry in general looked at our first car, and we were criticized for not using half shafts from a specific race company called Metalord. But Dick designed the shaft. Now, our half shafts, I think we call them shaft and a halves, but they were a little heavier, they were a lot cheaper, and we knew they could do the job. And we had done the design. Now, the next thing was testing. We did a lot of tests, and they talked about, having to alter Paul Ricard. But Paul Ricard was, a couple miles from work. I mean, right on the site there. So we did multiple 24-hour tests there. It got to the point where, yeah, we broke stuff, but then they couldn't break anything at some point. So a lot of testing. The biggest problem that we probably mentioned was getting the transmission to where it would run 24 hours flawlessly. So, a lot of transmissions went in and out, and we got, and that's the one time, I had to get a little executive vice president help. The Board Warner was a reluctant partner, but Francois really wanted us to work with them, and I told Francois, you need to make a phone call. So he called, and then at that point, the one guy that was helping us kind of in his spare time became dedicated to the program, I think, full-time. So a guy named Steve Holman, great engineer at Board Warner, was basically, they took the leash off him to make that gearbox into it still was never, I would call it a race gearbox. You could take one of those long gearboxes and put it in your Viper and drive it around, but it became a very strong sound gearbox.
Just the production car, though, we started developing the thing into a bulletproof unit using mock 24-hour races. I think most people know that story, or maybe you don't. When we were developing the car, we were kind of the redhead stepchild in the corporation because minivans made the money and that sort of thing. And if there was a problem with the transmissions in the minivan, for example, everyone at the proving grounds was 24/7 testing transmissions. And we had beautiful red Vipers sitting out in the field getting bird shit on them because nobody could touch them. So what we did was, since much of Team Viper kind of morphed over from Team Shelby that Mr. Pete Gladys over here ran, we were doing endurance racing with Shelby Chargers and a Daytona that we built, the GTU Daytona with a 400 horsepower, 2-liter motor, front-wheel drive. We did a number of things like that, and right around 1988, 89, we started hearing about this Viper thing, so all of these endurance racers started kind of making our way over to Viper. So let's make a real car here. And because we couldn't get testing done at the proving grounds in a timely fashion, we decided, well, we know something about endurance racing. Let's go to, say, Nelson Ledges, probably the crappiest little racetrack on the planet. And they ran an event called the Longest Day. And it was a 24-hour endurance race. At the time, we were running showroom stock cars. And we would break the racetrack as opposed to the racetrack would break the cars. I mean, it would just crumble within about 12 or 14 hours with 65 or 75 cars racing around it. We went there with Vipers, and we simulated 24-hour races. And we brought mechanics, and we brought the welders, and we brought the hammers, and we brought all the pieces and discs that we needed, and a lot of tires. And everybody who had some racing background, had SCCA licenses, whatever, jumped in the car, and we'd run a tank of fuel and do a pit stop, put another driver in, send them back out. And when we knew that we could complete 24-hour races with all of our parts, with no failures, we said, okay, now it's time to go let the car sit at the proving grounds and get bird shit on it, because we already know that it's going to pass. So we had a car that could survive 24 hours of torture before we even started the GTSR.
Well, thank you, and I certainly appreciate each one of you for being on the panel today and continuing to share these stories. They've really entertained me, and it's fun to hear what new ones pop out of your memories when we talk about some of these. So thanks again, and hand it back over to Maurice.
Thanks, Tim. I just want to add my thank you to you guys for coming out here today. It's great to see all of you again. It's been a while. So thanks for sharing your stories. I think they'll still be around after this talk is over, so if you have any other questions you want to go ask them, come on up and talk to them. Thanks to Sean for moderating. I'm not kidding. He wrote the racing chapter in the book, and it was almost a separate book, and I'm like, we got to cut this back a little, because it's going to be its own book. I said, yeah, you're doing your own book, so he's working on it.
Yeah, Sean.
For those of you who are here for the Viper Dream Cruise program, you've got some time now. If you want to go check out the best of the best cars under the tent or whatever, we've come back to the Sterling Center at 5 o'clock for dinner, and then at 6, I think, we do the garage crawl, and we've got some pretty cool garages for you to see. So, don't take off yet. All right? Thank you.